Hey, I'm Giuliano, and welcome to my studio in beautiful Harbison, Delaware. I've worked with artists like Dan and Shay with Justin Bieber, Florida Georgia Line, Brad Paisley, Chris Young, Tim McGraw, Tate McRae, Gabby Barrett, Michael Ray, John Mayer, Shawn Mendes, and many more. The way I got started in the music industry probably stems back to when I was a kid. I was probably 8 years old and had a fascination with the way how records sounded. So I was reading liner notes, and I knew who mastering engineers were. I knew what studios these records were recorded in before I even knew what a real studio was. So fast forward to when I was a teenager, I still had this massive passion for music and learning. I wanted to learn how to play guitar. So I taught myself how to play guitar, and I joined a band, and we started playing shows. I'm like, oh, this is it. I want to be a famous guitar player. And then we walked into the studio for the first time to record a demo. And I remember the first time I heard playback in the control room of our song. And I'm like, okay, forget being a guitar player. I want to be a record producer. That's what I thought it was. That's what I thought the job was at the time. So, and then I went to there was a local studio. I went by and said, hey, can I be an intern? Are you hiring? No. Okay, but I'm willing to dump your trash. I'm willing to clean your bathrooms. If I can just hang out in the room and learn, no. So I shot down a couple times. I'm like, okay, it's on me. I've got to buy my own gear. And I was broke at the time. So I was working, as an auto detailer, making no money. And so I was saving a little, money when I could and buying one piece of gear at a time. And I think I started out, I had a 8-track reel-to-reel with an 8-channel board, and I felt like I was on top of the world, 2 microphones. And so I started recording bands, and I'd go to them, like I'd go to your rehearsal space or your parents' basement and, record your whole album for free. And it was that kind of thing. And I kept doing it, and I built up to 16 tracks, and then I had my own little studio and an underground storage unit. It was completely awful, like in terms of the environment, but I was running a studio at night. I would detail cars all day long, and I was in the studio till 4 in the morning recording my friends' bands or anybody who would give me, $100 for a whole record kind of thing. But then I was in a music store one day, and I ran into a producer, a local guy in Virginia, who did all the big stuff. He did the bigger records, the cool bands, the stuff people knew about. And he said, yeah, I've heard some of your stuff. Would you want to engineer with me sometime for some of my records? I'm like, yeah, let's do it. And his name was John Alasia. And so he started hiring me for, gigs here and there. And then I did my own thing, and then he'd hire me again. And then the first big record we did together was John Mayer, Room for Squares. And no one knew who he was at the time. I didn't know who he was. He was just a kid that walked in with his guitar, had made amazing songs and amazing vibe and a whole thing. So that really blew up and opened a whole lot of doors for everyone involved. And then fast forward to a few years later, I kind of was getting burned out on the engineering side of things because I was traveling a lot. I was never home. And then I was like, you know what? I really just want to mix. Because then at this point in my career, a mixer became like a real job. Like that was a thing. People would hire an engineer and a producer and then hire a mixer on the back end. I'm like, that's what I want to do now. So guitar player to producer, wannabe, whatever, to now I want to be a mixer. So that day I decided to just mix I just went with it, and it's never stopped.
Long live them country girls, long legs and cut up jeans. Long live this way of life, long live nights like these. Long live...
One of my best memories from a mixing or recording session, I would say all of the recording sessions that I've done, because I grew up grinding away at this, but then I finally had the opportunity to go work in real studios with real musicians and do a whole record the way it used to be done, instead of piecemealing it like now. People do drums here and someone does bass here, and no one ever sits in the same room together. So to witness that as an engineer and see all the glue that happens between people, I can't even put a finger on it because I've had so many great experiences. Like living out of my suitcase in different cities, in LA for 2 months, New York for 3 months, and then come home for a week, and then I was out again. Me and my rack of gear, my outboard gear, my suitcase. That was it. I did that for years. And that knowledge I gained during that time was priceless, and it totally helps me now. Every day I pull from that skill set. Like, I feel like I understand that more about mixing because I lived that life, more so than younger engineers that don't know that. Everything's been copy and paste in Pro Tools, and nothing wrong with that. it's just the fact that I came up in a different time, and I think that was, it's just priceless to me. So I'd say all the recording experience I had. I would say for the mixing side of it, I used to work with a bunch of gear. I had like a summing mixer and you name it. I had every piece of analog gear known to man, and all of it kept breaking. Like I would be in the middle of a record. I remember being in the middle of an album and the vocal compressor, it broke. So I like guys like, hey, I need this recall done. I'm like, I can't do it. I had to overnight my whatever compressor back to Vintage King and have it repaired because I live in Delaware. There's no tech guy here. So I'm kind of screwed. But the best memory for me mixing would be when I said, I'm gonna mix in the box. And I started with the biggest artists in my career in country music. Like the first Dan and Shay record I mixed is the one with the song Tequila on it. It sold millions of copies. And when I work with Dan and Shay and Scott Hendricks, their producer for that album, they have the most discerning ears of anybody I've ever worked with. They're like basically aliens in terms of their hearing level. So I'm like, screw it, on this record I'm gonna mix it in the box, and if I fail, I'm gonna fail big. And if they love it, I pass the test, I'm never looking back. And the first song out, I sent it to them, they were like, holy shit, this is amazing. I'm like, I'm done, I'm selling my gear. And that was the best memory for me for mixing, because I feel like I lost 100 pounds that day in terms of relying on stuff that sounded great, but just didn't always work. The most important thing for me when I'm mixing a song is to have the trust of the artist, the trust of the producer, trust of the record company. And I love when artists don't give me a rough mix, a reference mix. That just like tells me, do your thing. And I've actually been told that. We're not gonna give you a rough, just do your thing. The record I'm working on now, no roughs. Just do your thing. Dan and Shay, they've never given me a rough mix. Just, Jeff, do your thing. And I love that, because then I feel it. Trust is a big thing sonically. If they trust you with their art and you deliver over and over again, that's a big deal. And I don't like referencing other music while I'm mixing someone's song. And if someone tells me, hey, reference this song, this is a vibe we're going for, I get that, but I also think that every song, every recording, every artist is different and unique. And that's what people love about those people, so why would you want to sound like that? And it's just a headspace thing. Whenever I'm mixing, I never go to Spotify and listen to someone else in the genre or something else just for a sonic reference, because it totally screws me up. It takes my focus away from what I thought. Like when I hear a mix or a rough mix or someone's session, I hit play, I let it play all the way through first before I make any judgment calls. But by the middle of the first chorus, I already know in my head where I think it needs to end up. And that, if I divert from that and listen to someone else's song or something Spotify playlist, I'm screwed. So I never do that. I'm pretty hard on that. The best thing about mixing and what I do and what I bring to the table, I would say, is the feeling when I hear a song and if the chorus hits and it just makes me want to jump out of my chair, or gives you goosebumps, or the vocal has this presence and emotion, it just sits right under your nose. That's all of it for me. To hear what they give me and kind of share the vision, they're like, okay, here's their vision. And I can hear that from the tracks from the time I get them. I can, okay, I think this is what they're going for, and I hope this is what they're going for, because a big part of my thing is almost being a mind reader. It's like you have to figure out what the end game is for the artist, but also what the end game is in my head sonically of how I'm going to go about doing that. So when all those things collide at the end of the day, and I hear the song back, and it gives me that feeling. If it does that, that's a win for me. If a song wins an award or multiple awards and sells 1 million copies, that's all amazing stuff, and everybody wants that. But to me, it's all about the emotion that I feel when I hear it back. And when you get that text at 2 a.m. from the artist jumping up and down, we're drinking on the bus, we love this shit, it sounds amazing. That is the best part for me about mixing.
The same one you wore when we were sky high in Colorado. Your lips pressed against the bottle, swearing on a Bible, baby, I'd never leave you.
Some of the more challenging things I face, the first thing being that when a band, label, or producer is in love with the rough mix, and I know I'm speaking for many right now in my industry, in my profession, mixers are all like high-fiving each other right now. When someone loves the rough mix, it's not because they love the rough mix, it's because they love something about it. But when it comes down to the label, it's usually because of volume, overall volume of the mix. let me rewind a little bit. A rough mix back when I was started doing this as a profession was literally a 30-minute mix at the end of the day you give the artist. Nowadays, the rough mix is really someone's mix that has been passed around from different writers to their laptop sessions to studio sessions, and someone's made a collective mix of this song where they spend a lot of time dissecting every part, and then they make it as loud as humanly possible, louder than any commercially released song. So for me to find a way to work and be myself and not have to chase someone's rough mix, but make my mix really loud, that's a huge challenge. And I think I figured it out, but it's taken a lot of years and a lot of tools and a lot of technology, and all that stuff helps. So I've learned how to mix dynamically. When that happens, mix how I mix, but just make it way loud, and they're stoked. The other hard part is when I have a great song with a bad recording. That happens. Not too often, but it does happen. Or a great song and it's perfectly recorded, but something like the lead vocal is distorted. How'd you overlook that? And as a former engineer, I'm like, how did you not hear that? But it happens. So I'll be the first guy as a mixer, and I'm probably one of the only few that actually takes the time to call the producer and the artist. I'm like, hey man, this is kind of blown out here. Can you send me a new vocal or do this? And they're like, yeah, sure. It makes it better. I'm willing to wait. And they do it. At the same time, you're actually probably impressing the producer, not intentionally, but it's from my perspective, because I really care. And sometimes that actually opens the doors for more gigs, because the producer's like, hey man, that guy had my back. I'm gonna re-record that vocal and that bridge and give it to him, and if he's willing to wait and make the song better. And I've had great results with that. And I've got a great rapport with my clients where if I need a new vocal or I need a new guitar track that's in tune, because you'd be surprised the intonations out on guitars. I juggle a lot of these situations a lot of the times, and it's okay. It makes for a better, product in the end. That's what I'm all about.
But I've been out of every reason. Now suddenly you're asking for it back. Could you tell me where'd you get the nerve? Yeah, you could say you miss all that we had.
ControlHub is basically a look inside my brain with a one plug-in solution. It's a complete capture of my signal chain on everything. Basically drums, guitars, acoustic guitars, banjos. Got banjos in there too. What's great about it is it takes, when I had 5 or 6 things on a vocal in a parallel send and this and that and this and that to make one sound, I've covered all that in my expansion pack on one plugin. And I don't know how they did that, but it's spot on. And I really wish I had had this like 5 years ago myself. One plugin now covers the work of 20, and I'll take that all day long.
I really care how bad it hurt when you broke me first. You broke me first.
I would say what makes my signal chains different in my expansion pack are I've embedded problem fixers first in my signal chains. Like I always high pass everything, even bass and kick I'll do at like 20 hertz, because I've set up my chains to fix low end problems and rumble from the get-go and then go into the gear that I would use. And I've covered things like programming kicks, trap hats. I've also got built in a lot of things I run into with pop music, like programming elements and things like that, and parallel sends and reverb returns and things that I go to every day, but that not necessarily the other guy would use. So I feel like I'm hopefully opening doors with my expansion pack in the genres I work in. Some of my go-to signal chains I put in this expansion pack are, again, tools that I've been using for years and tools that I've modified to be more modern in today's music. When it comes to my channel strip, say on a vocal or a kick drum or snare, I'm less of a broad stroke guy that one plugin does all the heavy lifting, and I'm more of a this does this much, this does this much, and it all equals a whole in the end. When you mute each one, you're not really hearing it, but then if you open them all up and take them all bypass, you're like, oh shit, okay, that makes a difference. But it's all small stages of compression, small stages of EQ, couple limiters to add up to one big whole, and that's actually, I think people are really going to dig it for that reason. All my presets have all that stuff baked into it. Things that I've lived and learned over the years work for me, and hopefully works for everybody else.
But I'm gonna try if it's 10,000 hours
My favorite feature of ControlHub has got to be the pre-EQ. And let me explain why. I'll mix a song, like a couple songs a week I'll mix and send it out to the artist, the producer, the A&R guy, whoever needs to get it. And they'll have their minor adjustments, turn up this here, turn down this here. But then the singer will say, hey, I want to cut the second line over the first verse. I'm not feeling it, the emotion's not there. I'm like, cool, go ahead, do it, send it back to me. So then I get a Dropbox link. He's on the road, he's singing on an SM7, he's not singing on the C12 that he was originally singing on in Blackbird in Nashville. So the pre-EQ allows me to tailor the sound, the sonic, like high-end, low-end, mid-range of the SM7 to closer match the C12, so to speak. And so when I cut his line in, it sounds identical. And that's completely priceless to me. One thing I'd like to add is I have two rigs. I have my studio here, and I have another identical rig that I take on the road with me when my family and I travel in an RV. And this sounds crazy, but having these presets that I've dialed in my studio, in speakers with my 3 subwoofers in perfectly tuned room, to know that I've got a setting for 808, so to speak, that I can put on an 808 in a song from my mobile rig in my camper in Florida, and I know my low end's gonna be in check. It's almost like a security blanket. So I've future-proofed my own work within this plugin with certain high-pass filters and certain things that I know that I can trust. If I put this on bass, I know I can go mix in headphones, I'm gonna be fine. And that's a big deal. And I'm sure there's other people that work remotely like I do. So a lot of times I mix here, and a lot of time I mix on the road. And it's a security blanket for me, but I think it's gonna help a bunch of people as well.